I've already talked about Bleach Rivers of Souls at length before. In this video, I'll just call it Bleach. But what I couldn't fit in that video is to explain just how good this game looks. The visuals, the art style, the colors, I adore how this game looks in action and on still images. You see, Bleach uses NPR, which stands for non-photorealistic rendering. If you have played games like Naruto Storm or Guilty Gear, you will find a lot of similarities in its visuals. However, Bleach uses a lot of unique techniques that you will not find elsewhere. With no resources to actually explain how these techniques work, I decided to study them myself and showcase them to you in this video. Today I will showcase these techniques and show you how you can replicate them inside Blender, so you can later port them into other game engines or use them as part of your own projects. Before we start, I just want to say that this video was inspired by Nogi's Guilty Gear video. I highly recommend you give it a watch, as it explains multiple 3D techniques used in the Guilty Gear games that won't be tackled here today, but they're also used in Bleach Rivers of Souls. So let's start. We'll talk first about the vertex colors, which are the black lines. We'll talk first about the black lines. Bleach has inner black lines for muscle and bone details. They represent the inner line work that you see in the manga and in the anime. This is achieved with vertex colors. Vertex coloring is a technique where you assign a color, any color, to a vertex on the model. It's how games like Super Mario 64 used to color their characters. Nowadays, it's not used regularly for coloring because it tends to create a very ugly gradient look on the faces. But in Bleach, that gradient is gone, and only the edges are painted black. Why would that be? The reason it looks this way here is because Bleach uses a node script that reinterprets how vertex colors should be shown on the screen. If two vertices are painted red and are connected to each other, a thin black line is created that doesn't color the rest of the connected vertices, like a traditional vertex coloring does. It only paints the vertex, and only the ones that are connected. In addition, the further the vertices are from the screen, the bigger the lines will be. This makes the lines stay visible whether the character is close or far from the screen. Now, to do this in Blender, we simply select the vertices we want to mark. We switch to vertex paint and we paint them. We select which color we want to use, and we also connect them to our shading node system. If a mesh is cut, it can also make the line smaller than normally it is. Now, if you look here, Renji's hair has two vertex color layers instead of just one. So, I already discussed that one is for the line work, so what's the other one for? Renji's hair doesn't have black lines. The second vertex color layer sets the shadow color for the hair. This explains why parts of the hair are separate from one another. It is to assign different parts different colors of the shading, allowing you more control of the shading of each part of the hair. You will see that there are lower intensities on the bottom area, while higher ones on the top area. Next, we'll talk about the toon shading and the shader node system. This here is the root of the game shaders. Pretty simple, right? Well, what happens if we open it? Now, it looks pretty complex, but I will try to explain it as simply as I can. In Bleach, body parts like the face, hair, costumes, and weapons have materials assigned to their faces. Each material has a custom shader node that dictates how those selected faces will look. The custom shader that Bleach uses is called BSS1, which stands for Bleach Soul Shader 1, and is connected to 7 textures. The first texture is the base color. It sets the base color for the model. This one is pretty simple, right? Texture 2, the alpha mask. This controls the transparency. It ranges from 1 to 0. If it's set to 0, the faces become transparent. I suspect this is used to make certain parts of the body invisible, but because most textures do not use transparency, it usually goes unused. Texture 3 are for the shadow masks. You see, shadows aren't baked into the base texture. They are overlaid on top of it, so various parts of the model always have a shadow. The shader only uses the red color channel for this texture to figure out what parts of the model have places that will always have a permanent shadow. You can also control its base color and as well as its intensity. Next is the texture 4, the rim lights. Rim lights are lights that hit the outer edges of the body. This texture says which parts of the body always receive the rim lights. If it's empty or purely black, then no rim lights will appear. Unlike the shadow mask, this actually takes the colors of the texture and applies them to the faces to create colored rim lights. So if the texture is blue, the rim lights will be colored blue. If they're colored red, the rim lights will be red. These sit below the shadows and follow the camera position. There's also an extra set of smaller, pure white rim lights that wrap over the shadows and aren't controlled by a texture. Next is the texture 5, which are the normal maps. These ones are fairly complex, but to summarize, normal maps are special textures that fake complex details like bump, cracks, and surface falls. In this case, they trick the light into bouncing off a flat, low-polished surface as if it were a highly detailed model. Bleach uses it for characters like Ikaku, who has a scar on his chest. So to represent that scar, they use a normal map, which showcases the light of it. Most of the characters don't use them, but I haven't really seen texture normal maps be used in games with anime shading, so it's pretty cool that this one uses it. Texture 6, the specular highlights. They control shiny highlights. If the texture specular highlights are the lights that are emitted from the light. So usually you have the shadow, you have the base color, and you have the specular highlights, which tend to be like circles. If a texture is empty or black, the highlights will not show. If it's white, the highlights will appear. These also sit below the shadows and follow the camera position. This allows them to behave more dynamically. Specular highlights. They control the shiny highlights that you see on reflections. On the model, you have the shadows, you have the color, and you have the highlights, which tend to be like circular white dots. These ones react with the position of the camera. It allows a certain level of dynamic control that can only be achieved by being a slave to the camera. If the texture is empty or black, the highlights will not show. If it's white, highlights will appear. These also sit below the shadows and follow the camera position. Most materials leave this empty, so they usually only appear on metallic objects like weapons. You can also control the size and the color with the sliders on the nose shader. Scratches. During fights, characters will get bruises and scratches. And this texture is exactly for that. It has an opacity slider plus a color picker for blood that is red by default. But it's in-game changed to black due to, censorship. Censorship. Now let's talk about the game's modeling. The high polygon used to make the characters look as smooth as possible. You will see sometimes around 20, no more than 20 polygons per body. Combine them with the rest of the objects like the face, hair, weapon. You should have around 50 polygons per character, which is quite a lot. But this is used to just smooth out the curves of the characters so they always look like, an anime character. Very smooth edges are important for anime to look anime. Now, to do this in Blender, you simply select the edges of the model that you want to smooth and add more geometry or bevels. As for the textures, I haven't mentioned it before, but pretty much most of the textures are in 4K. 4K textures are amazing because they solve so many visual issues. You won't see any pixelation unless you zoom super, super, super close, which is nearly impossible to do that in the game, as the camera will not allow it. The only downside, the many downsides of this are larger file sizes, longer load times, and high VRAM usage. So I don't recommend to use 4K textures all the time. Just use it for like the most important aspects of the character, which is probably like the costume. And the issue is that the more you lower the resolution, the easier it is to see pixelation. So that's something to keep in mind. Usually, parts that are parts of the body that are small, like the weapons or the face, tend to use lower detailed textures. Now, UV mapping. I will not talk about UV mapping. It's very complex. I recommend you look some tutorials of it. Bleach handles its UV mapping very similar to traditional games. You won't see the squares on that you might normally see on Guilty Gear. But it's very fairly and very well done. Now, I want to talk a bit about the shadows. Now, shadows are a combination of multiple things. The high poly count on the model allow the shadows to look super smooth. You won't see spikes or edge or harsh edges on the shadows unless you zoom in very, 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 very closely. Plus, textures like the shadow mask warriors in 4K allows you to hide the similar shadows produced by the actual lights. The main technique I want to talk about here is edge splitting. Edge splitting is a technique in Blender which consists of separating the edges of the model into two. By itself, this doesn't change anything visually, but if you rotate the normals after splitting the edges, you can create really sharp lines on the model where the light hits. This creates a really harsh creases that allow you to control the reflection of the light, allowing you to create some really smooth shade. This replaces smooth color gradients with harsh lines to give a handcrafted 2D look. Now for the hair, they smooth the normals by cutting various faces and making them completely flat. This gives a very stylized 2D looking shadows. For the face, the mouth normals are flattened to avoid an overly pronounced mouth shape. This avoids visual glitches while looking at the character from the front. For the face, the mouth normals are flattened to avoid an overly pronounced mouth shape. This avoids visual glitches when looking at the character from the front, while still looking great from the side. The body also has cuts, mostly for muscle details, which becomes noticeable in shadow reflections. You can see that here where the edges of the model that is cut are actually white. Do this in Blender. You simply select the edges that you want to cut and you press B. Then you press Alt N to go into the normal options and press rotate. Then you can control which direction of the light will be hitting those edges and in which direction they will be redirected at. This is fairly complex. I suggest you watch some tutorials on controlling and editing normals. Something that Bleach uses to, that was explaining Nogi's tutorial videos, is that especially in the hair, because of how complex it is, it will usually create some very ugly normals. To easily edit, they will create like a circle, a sphere, and they will copy the normals of that sphere into the hair. And you will see this smooth, flat shading. It resembles a lot the one that you see in the anime. Bones. Moles have about 200 bones from the face and the body, and around 100 for the hair alone. The hair bones are kept separate, so in the main chain of bones. So animators have a complete control of where the position of those bones should be, without worrying about stuff like kinematics or parenting bones. One object, multiple meshes. Now, the more complex an object is, the more highly be better to separate it into multiple parts. This tends to happen in Bleach as well. For example, the face is actually divided into multiple parts. You have the face, you have the eyes, you have the sclera of the eyes, you have the iris, you have the lines that reflect the nose, you have the ears, you have the inside of the mouth, the top part, the bottom part, the tongue, and all of them are inside the same model, but they are separate. This is done to just easily control them and easily like rig them for the animation. Also, non-playable characters usually have more simple object and less objects to work with. I highly recommend to just keep the models as simple as possible. While you will need a complex model for animation, if you have to work with a complex model, then keeping them separate parts of the body so you can easily move each one of them is probably what I would recommend. And that's it. Of course, I didn't tackle all techniques, just most of them to help you set up your characters with these type of toon shaders. I will be leaving a default 3D character blender file with pre-configured shaders and vectex colors, so you can use it as a base to create your own characters and your own animations. Simply import your character that you want to make into the scene, copy the materials, and add your textures. Or you can also start from scratch inside the same Blender file. I will leave it in the description so you can pick it up and download and try it out yourself. Anyway, that's all for today. Hopefully this taught you something new, and see you in the next video. Bye bye and take care.